Bruce Poinsett. I'm a writer, writing teacher, organizer, also a radio host. Quick plug, my show, The Blacktastic Adventure, is on the Numbers FM every Wednesday at 7. Also got a show, The Bruce Poinsett Show, coming out in January, also on the Numbers, so stay tuned for that. I'm not above shameless plugs, we gotta make this work. So, today, this is the first of a Black News Future panel series. And today we're focused on print media, but upcoming installments of this are gonna be on audio and radio and podcasting, and then another one hopefully in March on the interface between politics and local media. So stay tuned for more announcements for that. But let's just talk about why are we doing this Black News Future series. So I'm a big believer in the power of storytelling. It's power to inform, it's power to inspire, it's power to hold people accountable. I've seen it, I've experienced it firsthand. And as Black people, specifically in this state, where, for those who aren't familiar with the history of Oregon, it's the only state that had laws on the books banning Black people from settling. And that's a legacy and a residue that lives with us to this day. But one thing that has helped, in my experience, and a lot of people's experience in terms of obviously not leveling the playing field, but being an equalizing tool in a lot of areas, is media. So why I want to do this series is to have some of the conversations I think are necessary about building media infrastructure. As a lot of you know, media in general, print media in particular, is in a topsy-turvy place. A lot of even major news organizations right now are scrambling, cutting down. They're not able to pay people, they're not able to put out stories. You can look at, I'm not gonna name names, but there are community newspapers out there, culturally specific newspapers. If you open them up, you don't find any local reporting. You find wire news stories from random places across the country. But when people depend on this information, what's the effect of that? So, especially at a time like this, again, where you have the major papers scrambling, there's gonna be even less incentive to talk about what does Black media in particular need. And the only people who are gonna make that happen is us. So that's why we're having these conversations today. And specifically, I believe I wanna use these conversations as a jump off point. It's not just we came here, we heard some people say some cool quotes and then we left. I want this to be something that leads to further action in building a truly robust, sustainable Black media infrastructure. In order to start that though, we gotta talk about where we've been. And you've looked around at the archives today, you've seen the papers over 160 years. But also where we're at and what we need. And to do that, I brought 3 guests with me, people I've interacted with in different forms through my decade or so in media. So I'll start off first with my left, Mr. Mac Smiff. Mac is a Portland, Oregon-based journalist, activist, and editor of We Out Here magazine, a regional online hip-hop magazine. He is known as a community organizer and leader in the Black Lives Matter movement, calling to defund the Portland Police Bureau. Smith has received attention during the 2020 protest over the killing of George Floyd and has been published in the Oregonian, Portland Mercury, and Vortex Magazine, among other publications. Next, we have Jenni Moore. Jenni is a writer and editor based in Portland. Formerly the music editor and copy chief at the Portland Mercury newspaper, Moore has also contributed as an independent freelance journalist to various regional publications such as Portland Monthly, Travel Oregon, Mercatus PDX, and We Out Here magazine. And finally, on the end, we have Donovan Smith. Donovan is an award-winning writer, producer, and multifaceted creative serving the greater Portland community. He's penned nearly 200 articles that have appeared in the Skanner, Oregonian, Travel Portland, the Portland Observer, Oregon Humanities, the Gresham Outlook, Portland Tribune, Street Roots, and more. His Gentrification is Weird project has evolved through the years from a t-shirt statement into a leading multimedia platform pushing important conversations about Black culture, policies in place in Oregon. So before we get started, can y'all give a quick round of applause to our panelists today? So we started the afternoon with a looking at the archives of these different papers, especially through pre-1940s through the 90s. And I just want to first get your all's just reaction to the archives, and anyone can start.
I came in late. I was gonna look after.
I thought that they were really interesting. It's funny because as someone who works in press and is always looking for Black people in press and whatnot, there's a really rich history of press, Black press in Portland that I didn't even know about. So a lot of it was really eye-opening for me to see folks I'd never heard of, and breaking stories I have heard of. So.
Yeah, I also came in and started talking with you, so I still gotta look at the archives, but in general, we're talking about the history of Black media in Portland and Oregon back there a little bit, and I just think it is important to recognize there are, even publications that have sunsetted between the 1800s and now that, Black people have been creating press here, whether it's been in a more mainstream sense or more underground, so to speak, and that those voices have always been something that, people have been trying to tell our stories, and it can look like newspapers, and it can look like other forms of documentation over the years too. So I do look forward to looking.
Just curious, did anyone see any copies of the Portland Challenger over there? No, it's very rare. You saw one over there? Okay, cool. Oh, over there, okay, cool. Yeah.
What do you know about the Challenger?
So the Challenger, I learned about this when I was copy chief at the Mercury. A local Black writer named Santee Hawley wrote a huge feature story on William A. Hilliard, who started the Challenger, I think in the 60s. And it was only around for like a year. And I think he actually at his house had a lot of the copies of it. And he actually died a couple years ago he had Parkinson's and things. But yeah, it was really interesting because he actually was the first editor-in-chief at the Oregonian who was Black after the Challenger kind of fizzled out because it was really hard to keep up. And he had to be a red cap at like Union Station and do all this extra stuff on the side to like be able to even get the ads and stuff for it, because as we all know, ads are kind of what drives revenue for all print publications, which is probably something we'll talk about today too, for the future.
Yeah, I like that, setting that up for later. Thank you. So let's just talk about, the situation of Oregon and the underlying factor of all of this, whether we're talking about all the archives you just, looked through, or the present and what you all are working through, which is operating under the white gaze. And we can start with Donovan at the end, but can you just talk about how does specifically reporting on, covering Black issues, knowing you have a predominantly white audience, no matter what, even whether you seek it out or not, affect your approach, if at all?
Yeah, for me, I got my start in journalism, or my official start at the Portland Observer, which is one of the two, print Black media in the state. And so when I started over there, it was really coming from a place of, I had just got home from college, I went to Fisk University and came back home, and was really in a place where I wanted to tell more stories and tell more of our stories, and that was kind of the place that I was coming from. So I was also just kind of connecting with people, and if I saw somebody who was doing something interesting, I would be really inclined to just tell that story. It wasn't something where I was thinking about the audience or who would read it. It was just, I'm gonna tell this story because I think it's interesting. And I think that's really been where I've come from on every single story that I put out is because I think it's interesting to me. I think people should know about it. And so I don't particularly write a story with thinking about this will do well for, the whites. Like that's not how I'm looking at it. But it is interesting too when you write a story or put out anything and maybe an audience that you weren't particularly thinking was gonna gravitate towards it does. But I also think it's important to, like, as you're crafting stories in this state, in this place, to not get dissuaded from the stories you want to tell. So like, and when I was at the Skanner, I also worked at the Skanner after I was at the Observer. My cousin, she went to Tualatin High School. And I remember she had sent me a text one day of like the school website had looked like it had been hacked. And it said all these different things. It said like stinky Jews and nigger lynchings and things like that, all on the front page of the website, and she was like, this just happened. I'm like, what is your school doing about this, And she was like, they're not doing anything. And what was even more wild about it is that it was like, in a pocket of the internet, it was going viral. Like the student body kept retweeting it and talking about it. So I went the next day to my editor, who at the time was a white woman at the Skanner. And, I told her that I wanted to do a story about this. And, she gave me the green light. And I started working on the story. I called the school and asked them, why they, or what their approach was to this. And they're like, we just want this, we're not gonna talk about this. We think if we talk about it, it's gonna make the thing worse. And we basically were dissuading me from even doing the story. And I kept doing the story because I was like, no. And, I talked to this organization, Teach Intolerance, that works across the country about even the school's response. And they're like, this is basically the equivalent to somebody spray painting like a swastika on the side of the school. And I'm like, oh, we don't have to talk about this. And so anyways, I put the story out. And it, the school website hadn't actually been hacked, but somebody had altered an image to make it look like it, and it was a student. But nonetheless, when the story came out, then I remember seeing like a lot of black parents talking about, oh my God, this school is so, terrible. Like they do not address what's going on with our kids out here, da 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 da. Or I didn't even know this happened. And it forced a conversation with the school. It made them change their like bullying policies and all of these things. And so I think in terms of, white gaze and, whiteness trying to tell you what stories to tell, I always kind of keep that, in my mind, like what that meant for my cousin and even some of the things that I saw her go on to challenge the school later. I think it's important to, to stay true to the stories you want to tell.
I would agree that you can't ever kind of forget that there is a white gaze, because if you do, that can be problematic too. For me personally, I grew up in Oregon and I moved to Portland after college, after graduating at the U of O, the journalism school, and I had kind of like a rough time adjusting to Portland, even though it was always like the cool city growing up in Oregon. I was always like, it's kind of boring though, like what's even going on? Like, I don't see anything I'm interested in, and like all the, like the Oregonian and all the publications, I feel like if I would be looking for like events or something, it would always be kind of like not focused toward like hip hop or anything like R&B or anything. It was always like indie rock this, and it was all just kind of like one thing. And it was, I don't know, I found it really obnoxious that I couldn't find out what was going on in like local hip hop and stuff. And I didn't know about We Out Here at that time until I went to my first hip hop show. But basically after I found a show on social media, I was like, oh my God, there is a scene here and it's just not being talked about. And like, I want to know more about it and hear more about it. And so I got involved with Mac at We Out Here and started covering shows and interviewing artists and taking pictures. Did a lot of photography and stuff because I was just like documenting it, because I was like, oh my God, it's here, you know what I mean? So that's kind of how I got involved, and then just doing that more and more. the music editor at the Mercury, Kira, had reached out to me and she was like, I've been noticing your stuff. Do you want to also write for the Mercury? So that's how I got involved doing like a hip hop column and stuff. And I think I was always kind of like, everyone writes for the white gaze, so I kind of want to like cover the other stuff that no one's talking about. So that's been kind of my angle, but also I've been like pigeonholed also that everyone's like shoveling everything at me too. And I'm like, hey, I don't want to cover everything because I don't like everything. And also I'm not like, I don't know, I feel like I have varied interests, so like sometimes I'm interested in like a regular pop rock act or something, and then like, I don't know. I guess I'm just covering what's interesting to me, and that's my angle. I don't really think about who's reading it too much, but there have been times where like I've covered like people of color circles or something, or like for instance, one time I covered like a Facebook group that I'm not in anymore, but I was just it was like it was like how to find your community in Portland type of piece for like newcomers, and people got really upset that I covered certain things because they were like, well, now it's just going to be white people coming to our events. I was like, sorry, I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just talking to like new black people who are in town and want to find cultural events that they want to go to. So it's hard to not think about the white gaze at all, because you realize that it isn't just black people reading your work. It's obviously a lot of white people reading it too, so I don't know. I try not to think about it too much, but I just try to cover what I think my community wants to hear more about, because now it's cool, because since I started covering hip hop all the time at the Mercury, I feel like Willamette Week is now, when they weren't before. They're like, oh, we gotta keep up with the Mercury. And it's like, I don't know.
They might have given me an offer.
Did they? Oh my God.
So I'm Mac, I run We Out Here magazine. So for me, things are a bit different because I don't really write for anyone else that much. I kind of write for my own outlet. And I do some freelance work, and I turn down a lot of freelance work because I don't like what they want me to write about. So for me, it's a little bit different. There's still a white gaze, though. I always talk about how it's inescapable. Like, you can't get over the white gaze. Like, if it's not a white editor, it's gonna be a white producer, or or a white person doing the artwork or picking your photos or whatever. That's always going to change something and take something out. Back when I used to write for the Oregonian, they used to always take like entire paragraphs out of my writing. So I would have like an idea about this music, and I would kind of tie it into like a political thought or whatever, and they would just like pull all that out. Like, no, this is about music only. So for me, that was always kind of an issue, and eventually, they replaced me with a white guy. So that was kind of obvious that it was going to happen. So I realized at that point that for me, I didn't want anyone to have a control over my words. I talked to a friend once about the layers of white oversight that come with writing, and he was like, it's kind of like Shrek, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of like Shrek. There's a lot of layers, and there's a lot of layers to the ogre. But that's kind of what it is. It's like there's no escaping it. It's always going to be there. So like Jenni and Donovan said, you have to just kind of write for your people and put it where they can find it. And I find that placement oftentimes is more important than anything else. I can write an article and put it in the, not to beat a horse, but the Willamette Week, and none of my people are going to read it. So it could be the greatest article on earth, but it fell in the forest and no one was there, right? But if I put that same article on my own site, I know that my people are going to read it and my people are going to share it. And then eventually what happens usually is that people that I think wanted to hear it, like a Willamette Week or whoever else, are going to also pick it up because people are interested. So I think that oftentimes we give our power away by looking to white, outlets to give us a voice, and really our voice is already here.
So, quick, kind of messy question here, but when I was reading out your bios earlier, you named about 12, 13 different outlets, and I'm just curious, how many black editors have you had?
0.
I had about 15, 11, no, I'm playing.
Well, okay, 1. I've had Mac. Mac is editing.
And Jenni's edited me as well, so.
Yeah, I think in terms of, because I've done writing, and video productions and storytelling, I can't think of.
Let's just go print.
Print, yeah.
Print media.
Print, 0.
Okay.
Well, no, you know what? On the Vortex thing last year, you were like the co-editor.
I was the editor. That was true. I didn't do One Piece being there.
So Mac. Yes.
So for the sake of juicing the numbers here, I think I've had 3, but also one of them was Mac. But
What does he do? I'm like, nothing.
so I just want to give y'all a picture when we're talking about, again, the infrastructure of black media. In terms of what is getting put out, in terms of the gatekeepers of what is being put out to the world, it's very barren out here. And again, I don't need to name any particular papers or anything, but it's just, yeah. We all are part of like the Mac tree on this stage. But to transition from that though, I was curious, I always ask people, how do they consume news? So, as news producers, as news makers, and just, it doesn't have to be like a long, elaborate answer, but just like when you are, looking for the info for the day and just your normal routine, what does that look like? And anyone can start.
I watch Roland Martin pretty much every day.
Why?
Facts. I watch Roland Martin pretty much every day. I used to watch Democracy Now! Pretty much every morning, and that's very depressing for me. So I don't watch Democracy Now!, at least not to start my morning. It's great information, but yeah, it's very depressing. But Roland Martin is what I go to on YouTube, who's a black newsmaker, not based in Portland. And online, stuff will, either I'm seeking out information or passively it'll come through my timeline. Yeah.
I think I would say the same. I think locally, mostly on the internet, at the weeklies like the Mercury, maybe the Oregonian if there's a specific headline. And then I think more like outside of local, I would say I watch a lot of Trevor Noah on The Daily Show. They're on YouTube specifically.
I don't think I watch any news anymore. I put a hard ban on watching Trump the last year, and then I haven't gone back to news at all for the most part. I pretty much just get up in the morning at I get up early though, I'm up at 5-ish usually, just online though, so I just hop on Twitter and I start seeing what's going on the East Coast. And I usually check the NYT feed, and I check, I usually get the Mercury feed and the X-ray feed in the mornings, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Straight off the internet.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about just getting it off the feed and following certain things, because generally when I put this out to the public, the answer I get the most is Twitter. And I mean, your name is one that comes up a lot,
Same.
which I think is interesting. And actually it leads me to ask you, do you feel any kind of responsibility as a go-to source, especially when that's not your actual job?
It sucks so much. I used to have so much fun on Twitter. Yeah, Twitter is where I get jumped every day now, so it's different than it used to be. I used to go on Twitter and just talk trash and have crushes on people and stuff, but now I can't do that anymore. Now it's just it's all bad. Can't do that anymore. I'm too old for that. Twitter is hard now because people do act like tweets I write are news. In fact, I was just tweeting about how my son got called the N-word. They gave me an enterprise the other week, and the OSAA called me, and I was like, oh, he was like, what did you do? And I was like, I didn't even put your name in there. But they found him, so it was it's kind of serious. I can't just tweet anything anymore. I can't be like, hey, my dad's sick. People will show up at the hospital. So yeah, it's different now. It's different now. So I have to behave differently online and just talk about things that are happening. It's not as fun like it used to be. I don't even have a burner, so it's not fun.
And to that end, as far as, because social media has become such an important part of getting the word out and, for lack of better terms, marketing your work to people, do you all have any particular ways you found that are effective? You know, like if I do this, it's going to be successful. Or conversely, are there things advice that people give of like, you should do this that you've tried and you're like, yeah, that definitely doesn't work?
I would say off top, I just think that if you believe in yourself as a writer, in the quality of your writing, that you should definitely take a chance on yourself and give it a shot. It can be hard to, like not have an audience at first, but if you're doing the work and putting that work in the right places, it can really pay off.
You're talking about like sharing your work?
Yeah, like sharing your work, whether it be on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or
I don't know. I feel like if I tweet my work, it doesn't get that much engagement. But if like another person with a bigger following retweets it, it'll like go crazy. So I throw my stuff up on like my Instagram story and put my link in my bio and tweet and retweet my stories. But I don't know. I feel like it depends on who else is gonna share it for me, because people see it because it's on the site anyway. I don't know how much me sharing it really works. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have like one time tested way of doing things. I'm like getting myself off of platforms like Facebook and Instagram and kind of focusing more on Twitter and LinkedIn at this point. And I don't think LinkedIn is particularly the best way to get your stuff out, but just for like my own, like controlling how much information I'm taking in each day and what's coming at me, that's what I've chosen to do. And we were just talking about it over in the corner, but I feel like last year for me, Twitter, like I had like 300 followers and wasn't very good at Twitter. And then when the protests happened, there were like a few black people that people were like really gravitating towards, and then Mac was one of them, and Mac let the world know there were other black people in the world, so I kept...
Not just me.
Yeah. And so I got like a lot of followers from Mac and just generally people like seeking people out online last year, so like I got a lot from that. But what's interesting is that between journalism and other hats that I wear, what those followers tend to eat up the most is anything having to do with police. And like that will get a ton of attention, but like other things don't get that same level of attention, and that's not like the end all be all to my focus or anything that I write on. It's a big part of it, but it's not it. So that is interesting. If I have anything to say about cops, my new followers will eat that up. That's just like their
Sorry,
jam.
bro.
Yeah.
I like how just even the phrase "my new followers" is like code for my white followers. Just came along, but we don't have all the time today to talk about this because it's like a 2-hour discussion. But I will say it is always interesting when you're looking at certain factors that kind of drive, engagement and statistics and building up your following and all of that. Why is Black death like the biggest factor? Why? I don't have an answer for well, I have some thoughts, but just something to think about. So, speaking of Twitter, Jenni, you actually posted something a while back that kind of caught my eye, talking about, as someone who covers the music scene, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misinterpreting this, but it's basically along the lines of, people getting mad at you for not covering them, but also those being the same people who just do a bunch of ridiculously sexist stuff to you in their engagement, but yet still also feel entitled to it, and also framing that kind of as like, somehow you're hurting the scene by not feeding that entitlement. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yes. I definitely have had rappers flirt with me to try to get me to cover their music. And I'm like, what's happening here? Are you flirting with me or are you trying to do business? Because, I don't know, it's just weird for me. Because then dating in the scene is already hard, and then that is just confusing, and then, I don't know, it's happened on more than one occasion. I'm like, you can just email me. Just send me a press release. It'll be more helpful.
So, kind of to that effect, like, kind of in a more general sense, because Portland is like, it's a small, big city, and honestly, like, if you're, as a friend of mine calls us, if you are part of the public blacks, aka people who do stuff like this, then either we all know each other or we're like a degree of separation away. But that can make it, I think, at least in my interpretation, I think that can make it pretty tricky in trying to cover stuff, especially if you are, you know, as you said earlier, saying, what does my community need? So can you just talk about like how that proximity and yeah, again, just this factor of like everyone knows each other and we all know the stories behind the stories and all the messiness, like how does that affect how you're able to do your work?
I think I'm left out of a lot of the messiness because people want to put their best face forward for me. Like they don't want me to know about the weird stuff, so because then I won't cover their stuff or something. I don't know. So I always feel left out, and I'm like, what is everyone talking about? I always have to be filled in later about the messy stuff.
I know everything. I can't say too much. I think that part of it for people in Portland, I mean, I'm not from Portland. I moved here when I was 11, but I've been here for almost 30 years, right? Aged myself, it's a ring. Something that I realized over time is that oftentimes the public blacks, is that what you call this, the public blacks, are not the people who are actually like from Portland. And that's a big thing that happens here a lot is that you know, a white, again, it's all about white gaze, right? People see these new blacks come, the new tenable blacks who are moldable and have not been worn out from Portland yet. And so they see us when we come here and they give us opportunities. They give us grant money. They give us all oh wow, black person, we don't have any of those here. Well, let's give you opportunities. And there's folks in the corner who have nothing still. So it creates a separate world. So you really do kind of have like the public blacks and then all the black people who go to the high school right here, who you never met. And it's like, that's a whole different world. And oftentimes like people like myself who have been here for a long time, or Donovan, we are part of that community as well. I went to Grant High School, right? So I grew up with those same people, but also I know what it's like to kind of be a new black here as well. And then also I grew up in the Muslim community, so it's a little bit different. I wasn't necessarily in the black community the same way as everyone else. I was at the black mosque, not the black churches, right? So it's a little bit different. So there are layers to our black communities as well. And that's really important also in writing, understanding that in black press. Because you can have, you know, what's his name? Emerson Bailey was here for a while. I think he's in Dallas now. He's a reporter. He did a great job here, but he wasn't from here. And people often say, "Oh, you have a black reporter." I'm like, "Yeah, but he's not actually a guy that's from here. He's like an imported black person." So it's different for us in press. If a black person writing it, that doesn't mean that he has a black audience. He might have an all-white audience, and for him, he's doing great. But his gaze all of his work is under the white gaze. Whereas myself, I might write, and I didn't know that he existed, and nor he I. And I had a completely different audience, and mine is blacker, right? So it's just a matter of kind of where you actually came from.
Can you repeat the question? I actually lost it a little bit.
Yeah, just, does it affect how you do your work, just being, as being immersed in community and having knowing all the, again, stories behind the stories, but then also as being someone who's like in that public space and all the like pressures that come with that, and trying to be like someone who's saying, I do this because I want to serve community needs.
Yeah, I think knowing the stories behind the stories makes how I read anything from other writers different, because it also makes me think, why didn't they talk to this person? Or if this would have been here, it would have completely changed this article. And it's sometimes how even like, if I'm doing a story, I might write it, you know, like with that same gap in mind, like I'm gonna talk to these people because this isn't what's, you know, being told right now, or this isn't how this story is being framed. So yeah, I think about that, but I think all the things that Mac was just talking about, like the layers of being Black, you know, in Portland and Oregon, and whether you're new or from here, or what communities you're a part of, even being from here, all of those things are important to keep in mind, even when we're talking about the like shared experience of being Black. Because that can get cut out, even for somebody like myself, being from Portland, you know, like my stories are informed by being from this community, but also going to school in the suburbs, like Oregon Episcopal School. So like the other stories that I have in my mind, a lot of time are like the wealth, you know, the disconnection between wealth, the disconnection between opportunity, like that I've seen, that I keep seeing from like peers that were, you know, part of networks that go back generations that have given them the opportunity for XYZ versus other people that I know, family members, community, and knowing that the stories can't just be told in like these sound bites. So like I even have a hard time even doing interviews sometimes because I want to explain all of those layers sometimes at length. And so yeah, that's a big part of how I think about things.
I think also about the proximity thing, the hardest thing for me at least is that like knowing so many people and then trying to write about them can be okay. So like in traditional journalism, you're supposed to like not have a conflict of interest, but if you're friends with someone, then it becomes weird if you're writing about them, because then it's like, are you writing about them because they're your friend or because you know what I mean? So that's hard for me, is like keeping a distance, but also being like, but I do want to be friends with you, but you are worth writing about. But then like going back to that William A. Hilliard and the Challenger thing, he was writing about his friends because he was like in close community with them. Like a lot of like the sports people he was writing about were all like, not just sports, but like everyone in his friend group were like the first Black person in their field to do such and such. So it is worth writing about, but he also like knew them. So I think that it's kind of different when you do have like a small community and you're writing about it. For us, like it might not be the standard rules that you have to follow. Sometimes you have to like toe the line.
Sometimes speak all the time.
So speaking of that, I think Donovan, you were talking about earlier in terms of just seeing all these different stories and trying to, and even just now talking about the difference in terms of the scope of Black stories throughout this state. Because again, people focus mostly on like police issues, but like that is a small, like it's a very important part, but it's a small part of the story. It's a small part of the dynamics, especially when you talk about, again, people who've lived here all their life, transplants, people like me. I grew up in Lake Oswego, you know, Lake No Negro, Oregon. That's a very different story than Portland. Like, and we don't get those layers. We don't get that nuance. We don't really explore that, even though, again, it affects our daily lives. It affects how we interact with each other, how we put stuff out to the rest of the world. But to that point, because I do want to talk more about kind of like the infrastructure and what we need in terms of being able to tell more of these stories. And the first thing that always comes to mind is funding, you know, money, actual tangible money. Like, I'm part of a Facebook group that I'm not gonna name, but I see a bunch of messy stuff in there all the time, but I also see stories that, you know, in another setting, like say if someone was willing to pay me a living wage and benefits, I would cover. And I'm just curious, like how often, for all of you, like, are you scrolling through the feed or, you know, through your networks and you're like, man, I'd be all over this, but no one is paying me for this, even though they tell me all the time my information is so valuable.
Oh, daily.
Yeah, I think it's pretty frequent. And also, one weird thing that happened with after George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests is that I think all these outlets are now like super hungry for Black voices because they're like, oh my God, we're the problem, and we need more Black writers. You know what I mean? I don't know about you guys, but I've had a lot of people that I've never written for be like the Oregonian hit me up. They're like, we would like you to cover stuff, and I'm like, really? Because I tried to intern for you guys like 10 years ago, and that didn't work out. But anyway, so I think that there is opportunity for it now. It's just like, who are you willing to write it for? Because I've definitely had to turn down some things with outlets that I was like, actually, I don't want to write this for you. Like, I'd rather write it for someone else. Because there's certain publications that have been kind of problematic in the community, so yeah.
Yeah, I think this is just an example that's coming to my mind right now, but like I like covering music a lot as well, and you know, just because of the lack of infrastructure around the Black community and in Black stories, like how many things don't get elevated that typically would get. So, for example, there's an artist from here named Swiggle Mandela, and you know, he's been putting in work for a very long time, you know, in the city, and he just he's been putting on social media that he did a song with Jim Jones, who, if you don't know, then you know, do your research, but you know, he's doing a music video with him, and you know, like, this is a big thing in, you know, the context of Portland music and, you know, elevation of the scene, but to my knowledge, I haven't seen any headlines that are covering that at this point, and this is like a major thing. You know, I think it's the same reason actually that he ended up calling out you know, the Willamette Week. He did a whole song called Dear Willamette Week where he was calling out the framing that they have been given the hip hop scene, you know, kind of, you know, is Win the next whatever in hip hop, which Win is an amazing artist, you know, so it's no shot to her, but just the fact that there are people that are from the city that have been putting in work, those stories just don't get the elevation unless people like us are the ones that are elevating them. But the larger kind of white gaze, if you want to call it that, just does not go and elevate, whether it's because of lack of knowledge or thinking that there's a lack of importance to the things that we might be scrolling down the timeline like, dang, that's important, that's major, you know.
So even when we talk about funding, like, Jenni, you're kind of talking about some of these like freelance opportunities that, you know, start coming our way, especially in the, again, the most recent like Black Death boom in, you know, work. But I want to take it even a step beyond that, like, not just freelance opportunities, not even reporter gigs, but in terms of development. Like, I know you all have kind of different paths to your careers, but I'm curious, like, where do you go for mentorship, or what kind of, you know, professional development do you have access to or use? And conversely, like, how much have you had to learn just on the job?
I've had to do all my learning on the job. I haven't gone to school for press or anything. I was good at English in college, but that's about it. Yeah, that's about it. So I've learned everything on the job. And I do have mentors, but like, I don't have like an official mentor. I just check in with people who mean a lot to me and who inspire me. So some of them are older, some of them are younger, some of them are the same age, but I just check in with people who are good people, and check and make sure that I'm on the right path. And if they agree, then if they disagree, then I have some conversations with self and with others as well, and to figure it out. So that's kind of always been the way. And if I don't have a skill, I'll learn it, and I have a good network of people who will teach me things that I don't know. Even as, you know, like a 40-year-old man, there's a lot of things I don't know about this industry and about this scene. So I still learn every day.
I think Mac is probably the closest I've had to a mentor, again, because he edited me at We Out Here and kind of got me into the scene more. I also had a Black editor she wasn't my editor, but she was the managing editor at Seattle Met when I interned there for 6 months. So she was kind of a mentor to me, and she helped me like get really good clips, and I don't know, just kind of showed me a lot about like fact checking, which ended up being integral to my career because my first real full-time job was copy editing and fact checking at the Mercury. So I feel like that was probably one of the more important things to my career as far as mentorship.
Yeah, I'll say like for me, my career in journalism, it was me walking into the Portland Observer and asking for a column, you know, and having no journalism experience, but thinking that I could, and, you know, getting a shot after I had harassed them for a little bit to give me a shot, and instead them putting me on the news beat. But with that, I think, you know, Mike Layton and Mark Washington, they gave me that space, and particularly Mike, you know, helped me shape my writing, you know, and, you know, even the lack of red pen that I was seeing on certain stuff made me think, like, okay, I'm actually doing this thing because he's been doing this for a long time, you know. So I think Mike, you know, was a mentor in that way. I think, you know, Helen Silvis and Lisa Loving, they both gave me a lot of information and just like shaping how I could even think about my stories, and encouragement around the stories that I was, you know, writing. And they saw me even when I was at the Observer and they were at the Skanner, and would even give me information and encouragement, and it shaped me. So, you know, I always have respect for those two, and it's been even, you know, as we've changed whatever institution we might be working for at the time, particularly with Lisa, like it's always been, you know, respect, and so I think that, and you know, I think I told you, like even when I was early on, just kind of doing my writing thing, I saw you at the Skanner, and I'd be kind of thinking like, I know that's good writing, so I'd be thinking like, what is, you know, how would Bruce maybe even think about this story? Like that was part of my shaping too. So I think there are kind of multiple people, whether it's been like you are my mentor, I am your mentee type of thing. I just like have learned from people along the way, and I think it's, you know, that's kind of been my mentorship, is learning from people along the way, but there are some people who have stuck out. Yeah.
So just real quickly, because again, as someone who also worked at the Skanner, I also want to shout out Lisa and Helen, because like you, I came in, my background wasn't in reporting or news, it was in opinion writing. And yeah, they did a lot in terms of just like showing me how to really do my job well. And again, also do it with an approach that, you know, came from like caring about the community, not just, you know, making news as like this stop to something bigger. So just want to, since we're recording this, shout them out again. You know, some of you might be thinking, so wait, this is titled the Black News Future Panel, and we've kind of been talking a lot about present issues, but one of the ways I find helpful as far as thinking is talking about what do we need and asking the question. So for those who may not have been keeping score through this evening, again, how many Black editors have we had total that are not on this stage right now in this panel? I think it was like 2, and those were both like in my case. But we talk about formal mentorship, professional development programs. How many did we mention out here? You know, we talk about funding, we talk about opportunities for people to make even just like a living wage, telling these stories that need to be told that really, again, do affect people's lives. Is not a lot, and when they do come, what's driving them? Is it the need for the stories, or is it a reaction? Usually, again, I'll just say it again, to Black death. So when we talk about what we're trying to build, what we need, that's where we can start. But before we turn it over to audience questions, because I'm sure you all have, thoughts and things you'd like to ask the panel here, I do want to end this on a more uplifting note. And I just want to ask you if there's like a local Black media personality. It doesn't necessarily have to be in print media, and it doesn't have to necessarily be current, that inspires you.
I feel like I know what this came.
I got words for Ken Body though. Ken Body's a national hero.
I would say, Black media is kind of broad, so I would say Intizar Abioto is very inspiring for her photography series that she did on Black Portlanders. And she did a TED Talk on it, and I cried while she was talking about it. So I feel like that's one of the more inspiring people in town.
Yeah, I would also, just broadening the scope of media, say Sharita Town has been amazing at keeping Black voices at the center, Black voices from Portland, Black voices not from Portland, Black voices across the space. That's somebody to follow, and it's not through Instagram or Twitter per se. It's just she's doing the work, and has been one of the most impactful in Black media in this place. Also, Nicole Hannah-Jones, has ties to this place, and so, I think that's important to remember. If you don't know who Nicole Hannah-Jones is, she's been a New York Times reporter. She's got the 1619 Project, which is a multimedia, dive into Black history, starting from not 1776 or the slavery period, or the period of that we most commonly look at slavery. But yeah, she's been doing a lot of great work, and just to know that that's a person that is also from and has roots here. She's somebody that I look to as a voice.